All right. Well, good morning. I hope y'all are well. If you're not, I hope that the Lord will be in the midst of that and show you his peace and his joy regardless, right? Yeah. All right. We are going to be in Isaiah today. Is it hot in here, guys? Okay, just making sure. All right, Isaiah chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Well, actually, let's start in verse 4. And the posts of the door were shaken. By the way, this is Isaiah, hence Isaiah 6. The Lord has appeared to Isaiah either in a vision, which is what it says in the notes in the Bible, or it could have actually been physical. Who knows? But the Lord came to Isaiah, and he was changed, as we always are when Christ appears. Verse 4. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So I said, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth with it, and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. And God responded with, Go and say to this people, ... Right? Now, not only is this a song, this verse is probably well known because it's one of our favorite songs to sing, right? I see the Lord lifted high. And we have this vision of heaven that not only do we see in Isaiah, but we see in Revelation. I didn't read that part, but it's showing a picture of heaven, or he is brought up to heaven, or whatever way we want to bring. It doesn't really say in the text if it was physical or spiritual, and it really doesn't matter. But Isaiah was changed. And there's a reason I want to go through this verse, because I think it's very crucial for us. These chapters tell us a lot about our interaction with God and how he interacts with us. This is just not for Isaiah, it is for God's people. Like a lot of the things in scriptures. There's a verse in scripture that says, These things were written so that we, like them, might learn and know who our God is. And so this is something that we can apply in our lives. So I think it's very important. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. If you remember that, I think it was Sermon on the Mount, where he'd say, You've heard it said, or you've seen it written, that you shall not murder. But I say to you, if you think in your heart, then you're a murderer. He went through a lot of statements like that, which were there to refute the people that said, well, as long as I give an outward show of things, then I've met the mark. I'm doing the bare minimum to get by. And God says, no, that's not even the bare minimum. That doesn't work. And so you've heard it said, he would say, but I say to you, interestingly enough. And God's saying that to us a lot. You've heard it said, but I say to you. And a lot of times, guys, we respond like the Pharisees. God says, you've heard it said, but I'm asking you to do more. I've had people, I wasn't going to say this, but I've had people go, well, tithing is Old Testament, and I shouldn't have to do it. Okay, well, there's two things we need to talk about here. One is a matter of the heart. And the other is, you're absolutely right. The Old Testament says tithe. The New Testament says give more than a tithe. Get out of the abundance of your heart. There is no end to what you can give, right? And so it's one of those things that Jesus, we talk a lot about Jesus setting us free from things, and rightly so. But a lot of times, like in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus called us to more. not to less. What might have been acceptable in the Old Testament of, well, I hate Kevin, and I want to kill him all the time, but hey, I'm not doing it, so that's good. I don't want to hate, I love Kevin, he's an awesome guy, and I don't have any problem. I mean, it's wonderful to serve him, okay? It's a privilege and honor. But you see what I'm saying? God has called us to more than that. And we often seem to think that God has called us to less. The only difference is we have been released from the bonds of sin and death, meaning that we now can act like what we're made to be. So it's a matter of I am, I be, and now I do. And where it used to be I do to be, right? Now we be and we do. Bad grammar, but you get the point. All this to say, you can be a Pharisee or you can be righteous. Remember the unrighteous judge? No one would have confused the judge in that story as a righteous judge, because the woman had a righteous cause. If you remember the story, the woman had a righteous cause. She came to the judge, and the judge blew her off. I don't care. You think I care about justice? So what made the judge actually decide for this woman? She kept bugging him until he's like, whatever, I'm sick of this. It's easier for me to give in to you than to do what I don't want to do. So no one reads that scripture and goes, man, that guy's a just judge. No, he finally just got sick of it and he did it. In the same way, guys, we can be a Pharisee or we can be righteous. A Pharisee is not righteous because what? Their heart is not there. It's not there. And I say all this to make the point of what we see when Isaiah is confronted by the might and the glory of the Lord. What does he do? Does he go, yo, man, it's good to see you. Hey, come on, buddy, pal, aren't we one? Look, you're coming to visit me? Man, am I something else? The Lord of the universe is coming to visit me. Because that's how great I am. Is that how Isaiah responded? No. Guys, it's very important when I say that Isaiah shows us how we position ourselves before the Lord. And when I say position, I don't mean posture. Like, oh yeah, we need to fall on our knees because, he's God. First off, we see time and time again when only an angel comes, people are crashing down and go, ah, right? But like the reading today, I think it's Peter, when Jesus tells them to fish to the other side, what happens? They catch these fish. He's like, this guy ain't a fisher. He doesn't know what's going on. I know what's going on. We did this all night. Jesus says, throw in the, okay, for you I will, just because, you're like the Messiah and all. But you don't understand about fishing. I do. And when it happens, Peter, in his simple way, he recognizes what? He recognizes that Christ is much more than a simple man. And what does he do? He falls to his knees and says, I am a man, unclean man. When Isaiah is confronted with the God of the universe, how does he respond? How does he position himself? I don't think he's thinking this through, but this is the point. He says, whoa, I am undone. In other words, in modern language, I'm finished. I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm right? I'm a man of unclean lips. What is he saying? He said, there's nothing in me clean. I am unworthy to stand before the God of the universe. I dwell in the midst. Not only, see, this is the proper thing. He first says, this is how awful I am. And then he says, and I'm with people that aren't with you. It's a righteous judgment. This is not unrighteous. This is judgment in the proper way that Christians are supposed to be judged. Lord, I will say first, I am chief of all sinners, and everybody with me is. In other words, you are not judging out of context. It's a righteous judgment. We are not worthy. And I live with a people that are not worthy. And so the position that he puts himself in is, I'm nothing. And guys, that's not the end of the story, but that's the beginning of the story. In other words, there's much more to this. But are we positioning ourselves to know where we are or I would put it here, who we were? to acknowledge who we were, because that's what we were. And what does Isaiah rightly say is what we deserve? He follows up that with, my eyes have seen you, and I deserve nothing but death. That is his response to the Lord appearing to him. He says, I have seen you, and I deserve death. And he rightly puts that. None of us deserve anything but death. But it doesn't stay there, guys, right? It's not where we dwell. That's where it starts, okay? But then what happens? God sends an angel, right? He goes to the altar. There's a lot of, we won't go into it, but there's a lot of imagery here. And they grab a coal off the altar with tongs, and they go and they touch Isaiah's lips. And so the Lord sends an angel with a coal, and he touches his mouth and says, behold, the coal touched his lips, and it cleansed him. It took away his iniquity and took away his sin, and God says, your sin is purged. Notice that God didn't say, yeah, everything's right, it's cool. Yeah, get up, Isaiah, you're fine, don't worry about it. Yeah, that sin stuff, don't worry about it. What did he do? God dealt with the sin, and he purged Isaiah. Also tells us that purging and getting cleansed can be kind of a painful process, right? Can you imagine a coal being touched to your lips? That's pretty sensitive. I think it also speaks to us on sometimes the process. What's the biggest pain in the process for us? Really, honestly, guys. We can talk about pain of God having to use very tough circumstances, because we keep going around the mountain. He's had to use very tough situations in my life to get me to see my stupidity, for sure. But the worst or hardest part, the most painful part, I would argue, is me submitting my will to him. Because that's what happened with Satan, and it's what happened from the garden all the way through. That we want to do it our way. And so I really do think that is the painful. But Isaiah is like, here I am, Lord. Now I want to just take an aside here, that Isaiah models the exact opposite of what so much prevails in our society, which is the mindset of entitlement. Now, I know we've used the word, or not me personally, but a lot of people have used the word entitlement to segments of our society, and that can be no more wrong than anything. There is not a child or an adult or an old person in this society that really isn't riddled with entitlement. And it's kind of calling the kettle black when you say, hey, you're entitled. No, you're entitled. And I am entitled. Because we think we deserve everything. And Isaiah's like, I don't deserve anything, Lord. This is the problem with entitlement. When we, in my strength, say I deserve, which, guys, that's just the sin of the garden. That's Satan's sin. It's pride. I deserve, right? Well, that's just bad. Well, okay, it's bad, but why is it bad? Because what we fail to do is let God empower us. That's a word people use. I need to be empowered. Well, how am I going to empower myself when I am a broken, ruined man? What happens here? Does Isaiah cleanse himself? Does Isaiah take away his sin by his great actions? No. God does it. And the problem with entitlement is I will do what only God can do. See what I'm saying? Entitlement says I will do it, and God says you can't do it. Any empowerment, look, I'm not trying to be critical of these things on the schools, right? And they'll say these words, You're like, okay, yeah, but, like be empowered. Yeah, but how? Or, they'll say statements that are good in themselves, but they're pithy because they have no backing, right? It's like in America, it's like, I thought that was the computer for a second. I don't know why. I wish I could remember a word. But they'll have these words and you're like, yeah, but guys, apart from God, it's pointless. Do good for others. Okay, why? You just told me there's no good in this world and there's no laws or manner or anything. I'm free to do anything I want. There's nothing that says I can't do anything. But be good. Okay? What does that mean even? Because your good and my good could be, Kevin, let's pick on Kevin again. Maybe Kevin's good is stabbing people in the back all over the place, right? Yeah, it's kind of good, yeah. I'll tell you right now, I don't think that's very good, right? But when God empowers us, guys, we are empowered by the God of the universe, the one that Isaiah fell before. And honestly, guys, if we saw God appear to us, we'd fall flat on our faces too. Because everybody that's confronted with the God of the universe falls on their knees and says, I am a man of unclean lips. Because we see the difference between our righteousness and his righteousness. Isaiah was not even entitled on his life. He said, take my life. It's not even mine. And yet, what does God do? God doesn't excuse what Isaiah, he's like, no, that's the wrong kind of thinking. Isaiah, he says, yes, but son, I'm lifting you up. I'm giving you life. I am healing you, and I'm empowering you. I'm doing this. Not me, him. And so, receiving his grace and his life, right? So, which brings us to who we've become, right? So we had who we were, what we deserve, what he has done, and who we've become. If we don't see that he's the one empowering us, if we don't see that we've fallen and need God, then how are we going to get to this point where we have become what we weren't? It can't happen, guys. We have to come to the end of ourselves and say, yes, I'm talking about salvation, but I'm also talking about our daily lives and things that we resist the Lord. Isn't it funny that you always hear, well, I don't really understand the Old Testament because the God of the Old Testament is confusing me. This God of the Old Testament is the same God of the New Testament. Is he not doing that today like he was doing then? Was he not concerned about Isaiah? Was he not bringing healing and restoration to Isaiah? Did he not do things that Isaiah could not do? Our God doesn't change, guys. He remains the same. Yesterday, today, and forever. And I didn't make that up. That's in his word. Over and over and over again. So who have we become? Some of this is inferred, but what do we see? We see that Isaiah was chosen. Now, again, like today, he was chosen before he was redeemed. Right? He was made clean. Again, not by his actions, but positioning was important, right? If Isaiah had said, nope, would God have still done it? I doubt it. He said, well, I'll find somebody else. Right? And I'm not taking a theological application here. I'm just saying Isaiah had to acknowledge that he had fallen. He had to acknowledge that he wasn't good enough and that he needed something beyond himself. If we can't acknowledge that, then we're living in our own righteousness. That's the same today as back then. We live in our own righteousness. And I don't want to stand before the Lord of the universe in my own righteousness. I don't know about y'all, but mine ain't good enough. I can tell you y'all's isn't either, but you know. So he was chosen, made clean, and where he deserved death, as we all do, he was made alive. God's grace was revealed. Yes, in the Old Testament too. God's grace was in the midst of where Isaiah was. And what do we see the results of that are? A new purpose. God then says, which I think it's kind of funny. It's like, he kind of knew this whole process, right? Now he says, whom shall I send? I just wonder, Kevin, I wonder, who can I send? Who will go, interesting, for us? To go back to Deacon Kevin's sermon, he doesn't say for me, he says for us. The Trinity, right? Who's going to go for us? Interesting. Yeah. Who's going to go for us? I wonder who that could be. In Isaiah's response. Wow. What was Isaiah's response? Here I am. Send me. Not, yeah, I guess I'll go. Maybe. If you kind of need me, I guess. What was Isaiah's response? I am nothing. I am worthless. I can't do anything. And then we got a guy that God says who can go, and he goes, I'll go. What changed in Isaiah? What changed in Isaiah, guys? He was confronted by his God. He found that he was forgiven and set free, that he was cleansed, and that his God had called him for a purpose. And he's like, well, if God is for me, who can be against me? He would not have volunteered before. Now he's running to the top and saying, me, pick me, pick me, pick me. I'll do it. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That can only be said and believed in those that knew where they were and what God has done. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, because he is strengthening, not because I'm empowering myself, but because he has empowered me. My confidence in him and him alone, because if it were me, I'm not saying I don't have confidence in myself, I do. But ultimately, guys, our confidence in ourselves isn't gonna cut it. I love these football players. They're like, well, we just had more confidence than the other team to do it, and we just, we wanted it more than them. Really? Really? You're telling me that the other 32 teams now? The other 31 teams didn't want the Super Bowl, didn't want this, didn't want that? Give me a break, guys. Well, you just have to have confidence going in. I've had plenty of confidence and still been on a sucky team and we lost. I'm sorry. That can only go so far, guys. If you're equally matched and you're more confident than the other person, great. Okay, maybe that's where it works. There's the 13th man, so to speak, right? But us having confidence in the Lord that he will do all things, and that we are confident because we have seen where we were and where God has brought us to. Not being entitled, but saying, Lord, but for the grace of God, so would I be. But because I have seen your power in my life, I am confident of what you called me to do. If my God can do this for me, and he made me before the foundations, then that should be confident. So what is the result? God says, now go and say to this people. So Isaiah becomes a spokesman for God, right? So what has that changed for us? As we build in confidence of what God has done for us, when we know that he is capable, then guys, we shouldn't be silent. We should be saying, going out and speaking the words of life into this world. Not because I'm confident, because I'm confident in the Lord. Well, I'm kind of scared to do that. I understand. But God has said that we're to be what? We're to be a light, but we're also to be a testimony. What are angels, guys? Not that we're angels, but what are angels? Different group, totally different group. We don't die and become angels. Totally different people group. What do you call that? Different substance, right? What's my point here with angels?
Angels.
Yeah?
What are angels?
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, sorry.
They're messengers.
They're messengers, thank you, that was the point. They're messengers, thank you, wow, awesome, baby, one flesh, woo! They're messengers, right? And God says the same to us. He has appointed us to be messengers to this world. But you know, the great thing about us is we go and speak to people, and people aren't falling on their knees, or hopefully not, and collapsing in fear of us like they would with angels. We can go and speak the words of God, and they can receive them from another person. And that's incredible. And so this is the thing, guys. If we are confident in our Lord, if we remember and are not embedded with entitlement, and I pray that the Lord would suck that out of us, because it is taught from cradle to grave in this country and probably in the world, that we recognize where we've been and who has made us who we are. I am not a self-made man. I am a God-made man. And that's the key. And with God, I can do all things because He strengthens me, right? Amen.
Congregation,
Yes.
please stand.